And we usually take roll call and stuff like that. So
Good afternoon, sorry. Dawn, do you want to do the roll call?
I'm sure she will. Dawn, you on? Hang on.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay. Here I am. Phil DeFranco,
Here.
Timothy Hodges,
Here.
Catherine McKinnon,
Here.
Commissioner Mascara-Bruno,
Here.
Chelsea Ross,
Here.
Lisa Tupper Bates,
Here.
Greg Ugalde.
Here.
Anyone I may have missed in our rush from one meeting to the next today? Great, thank you. We do have a quorum for this meeting.
Thank you,
And
Dawn.
also, just as a reminder, the meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and both of those have started already.
All right, thank you. So Terry is going to give us an overview. Terry?
Yes, thank you. This is just a brief overview to give you a little bit of history on the board task force itself, and then the process that we use in considering the QAP. So the board of directors a few years back established this QAP task force to discuss the QAP, consider any changes that might be reasonable. While the QAP also governs the 4% LIHTC program, which is associated with issuance of tax-exempt bond financing, the attention of the task force is focused on the competitive 9% program that offers the limited credits once annually. And that has been our practice, just once annually. The LIHTC program was established in 1986 and is administered by the Internal Revenue Service, which makes the 9% credits available to states based on population. Connecticut receives approximately $10 million annually to allocate to development projects. Connecticut has CHFA as its allocating agency, and we follow Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code, which provides the rules associated with the allocation of 9% LIHTCs. Subsection M of the code spells out the responsibility of housing credit agencies and includes the requirements of the QAP. So basically, the QAP must set forth the selection criteria used to determine housing priorities, give preference to projects that serve the lowest income tenants, serve qualified tenants for the longest period of time, and are located in qualified census tracts, and it must provide a procedure for monitoring for program noncompliance. The selection criteria that the code requires, which must be addressed by the QAP, includes the project's location, housing needs characteristics, project characteristics, sponsor characteristics, tenant populations with special housing needs, public housing waiting lists, tenant populations of individuals with children, projects intended for eventual tenant home ownership, energy efficiency, and the historic nature of the project. So the QAP itself is not a housing policy, but it does support and implement housing policy that's in Connecticut. The policy documents that articulate and shape the state's housing policy are produced by the Office of Policy and Management's Conservation and Development Policies Plan for Connecticut and the Department of Housing's Consolidated Plan for Housing and Community Development, or the CON Plan, and the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. Both of those inform the QAP. Looking back, maybe I started with the big changes, okay? So we review and edit the QAP with the guidance and direction from the Board of Directors and the task force in order to ensure that what we have reflects the state's goals and priorities. Edits are sometimes major, we change threshold items, points, topics, or amounts, or minor, which we may just provide some technical clarification. And then we solicit feedback from internal and external stakeholders, research best practices of other states, and perform other analyses that might be useful in developing the new plan. The draft Redline QAP is submitted to the board for authorization to publish for public comment. The public comment period is held and a hearing held. The Board of Directors reviews the comments and may make additional changes to the red line draft or approve what is presented. Once approved, it is sent to the governor for signature. So I looked back, as I was mentioning, to 2015 to see when did we make any big real changes. In 2015, we started thinking about locations. A look back at that time, the prior 5 years saw only 4 municipalities with less assisted and deed restricted housing out of the 29 LIHTC deals that had been funded. So discussions began at that time to introduce opportunity mapping. This was to encourage development of affordable housing in new areas with greater access to quantifiably superior, if you will, education, health, safety, and job opportunities. The original map that was created at that time was CHFA's alone, but since then a new map was adopted by both CHFA and DOH. In 2016, that was the biggest change before our most recent. A points realignment was instituted whereby family units were added as a priority. Opportunity area per the map was added with 8 points to effectively double the points in the opportunity characteristics category. Sustainable design increased from 3 to 6. That was again, began to really incentivize sustainable design efforts. And elderly restricted units were effectively disincentivized. That since then, there were minor changes, and the biggest change came again in the 2022-23 QAP when the first 2-year QAP was introduced and the classifications were changed from the previous general class and public housing to new construction and preservation. The points established then remained in place for the following 2024 and 25 QAP, which has a 100-point system. And Deb will go over the points in more detail, but I just wanted to say the QAP is reviewed and edited from time to time to support emerging policy goals and meet identified needs. So that's what our points are trying to do. And this first meeting of the board task force is to begin to look at threshold criteria and points items and consider if they remain in alignment with CHFA's and the state's housing needs and goals, or if we need to rethink some of the categories, some of the points items, some of the threshold items that we have.
Terry, when do we expect to bring this to the board for final approval? Just so we can set like an outside date there.
Sure. So I had in the package, you had received a schedule, which will give you an idea of how we anticipate moving things forward. So we're starting with this first meeting of the task force and moving through maybe February and March, we'll be seeking public input and stakeholder input from various groups in the same way that we did before, large input, small input sessions. We'll discuss the community feedback with the board task force. We'll present the QAP draft to the board task force for consideration in April and have some discussion there, make sure we've tied everything in. And as we're having our meetings, we'll be producing a red line or, marking up changes that you're suggesting so that in April we'll have something to react to in total. So based on these task force meetings, the draft will be presented to the board of directors in the April-May timeframe so that we can have authorization for a public hearing and comment period. The summary of all those comments that we receive will be presented to the board task force and then to the board. If everything is acceptable as we've published it, then we would move toward obtaining approval of the full QAP and moving to the governor's signature. If we have to do another red line to maybe add more things and go out for another public comment period, then we're moving everything up a month. So we're hopeful that we would have a new QAP presented to the board of directors for approval in the June to July timeframe. The governor would then ideally sign it in the July to August timeframe, and we'd be good to go for the September, October overview session that we hold with developers.
Thank you,
Okay.
Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
Pat, do you want to go over the QAP, current QAP priorities?
Yeah, and I'm going to just do this quickly so that we can get to the points. But I do want to say that everything's on the table, right? We're taking a look at the QAP from the first sentence to the last word, right? And we want to make changes that are going to make the allocation of our tax credits more effective, more efficient, reach more places that really need it. But we have to keep in mind that there are projects out there now, some projects that have been submitted in this round that are built around the existing QAP. So we do sort of have to find a balance between making the changes that we want to see to move the QAP in the direction that we want, but not doing, wholesale changes that will take the projects that have been built for the past, 2 or 3 years towards an application and essentially making them infeasible. So we kind of have to find a balance. So I would say that if we're looking to make major changes, they should be fairly iterative. So we make some changes in the direction that our QAP is pushing us, and in this iteration, and then in 2 years, maybe we finalize them. So if that makes sense to everybody. The last time we did this, and we're going to do it again this time, we did roundtable discussions with all of the stakeholders. I think we had 5 different roundtable discussions. It had everybody from nonprofits to GCs to architects to developers and consultants. And everybody resoundingly was very pleased with the QAP as it stood back in for 22 and 23. A couple of hot points that came up then have continued to come up, which is supportive housing. The points being in there's no subsidy for them, whether or not they're needed, how we're defining it. So that's something that we have to take a good hard look at and find data and maybe find a better way to allocate those points, or a better way to have those points drive the creation of supportive housing in the areas where it's needed most. So that's something that's on the table. And the dreaded opportunity map, which comes up quite often in just a bunch of different conversations. We think that the opportunity map over time which has been demonstrated with the past 2 rounds, has been very effective in terms of guiding the creation of these affordable units in these high opportunity areas. Last year, I think 8 of the 9 applicants were in high or very high opportunity areas. And this year's submissions, while they're not that stark, but they are very heavily concentrated in high and very high opportunity areas. So it's effective. It may not be loved universally, but we have to take a look at whether we're okay with continuing to hear complaints about it while still seeing the success that it provides. So those are a couple of the bigger ticket items that have been called into question over the past couple of years. And I think it's something that we as a group should concentrate on. I think one of the most important starting points that we could get is to determine what our real understanding of our QAP is, what our QAP will do for us is. Like, what do we want our QAP to accomplish? And it may do that for some of you. But for others, there may be other things that you think CHFA should be achieving through the use of its QAP competitive round. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Deb so that we can start to get into a discussion of the points. And this is meant to just educate everybody. Even I get fuzzy on, what points are going where and how many and why. So this is an exercise that's meant to start everybody off with a good foundation moving forward. So with that, I'll ask Deb to start walking us through the points.
Sure. Thanks, Pat. I'm Debbie Alter. I've been leading the 9% round since 2017, so I've got a lot of experience with this. Dawn, do you want me to share my screen with the QAP? I'm a visual person. I don't know about anybody else, but it's easier.
Yeah, whatever's easier for you, Jen.
All right, let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, it says I'm screen sharing, but all I see is a Zoom. So,
Yep, we can see your screen.
okay.
Yep, you're good, Deb.
Thank you. All right, so the first category of points is rental affordability. And as mentioned, the first thing is supportive housing units. This is the applicants get points for either supporting the homeless population or the developmentally disabled population as defined in the supportive housing guideline. What we're seeing here now is that most of our developers are choosing to support the intellectually disabled population. That population comes with wrap rental subsidies, as well as the services are taken care of. They're paid for, I believe, by DDS. Each particular individualized support plan. So I think it's a little bit easier of a population for these developers to house. We are not seeing as much homeless service supportive housing units. We do see some that are supported by Section 811, which offers a rental subsidy for the homeless population and a light touch kind of service. So we're not seeing what we used to see, which was housing supportive service providers providing a specific plan for each development and the chronically homeless being housed there. So this is based on a percentage of total units. So they get 6 points for 20% of the total units in the complex, whether it's a qualified tax credit unit or a market rate unit. The second category is for households at or below 30% of median income. And now this one is based on percentage of qualified units. So that's just the tax credit units. So what happens is that it ends up being the same number as the supportive housing units. So they're using those same units to qualify in both sections. So for example, one that I looked at had 55 units and 44 of them were qualified. So 20% of the 55 units for the supportive housing is 11, or 20%, and 25% of the 44 units is also 11. So they're getting the same units are qualifying for the 14 points here.
They double dip.
Yes, so they're getting 14, they're getting 14
Yeah.
points, and
Yeah.
you're not getting anything extra for those
Yeah,
additional points, so.
Right. Okay, next is for households above 30% and at or below 50%. So a threshold requirement is that 20% of all of the units in the development be targeted to this AMI band. So these points are offered for developments that offer more than the 20% of units. And this one again is based on total units in the development, not just the qualified units. So if they have over the 20%, they get the points as shown here in the different tiers. If they have 21%, they can get 3 points. I'm not sure if that's very helpful either, but we mostly see people going for the maximum for the 7 points for 40% of the units. The next one is mixed income housing, which is market rate non-restricted housing. Again, we do see most developers going for the maximum here for the full 6 points. If they don't, then they are trying to maximize the tax credits by having all of their units be tax credit eligible units. The next one is an extended affordability commitment. This is offered to properties that are in a high opportunity area only if they commit to a 50-year affordability term. Our QAP requires a 40-year affordability term, which is 10 years beyond what the code requires of 30 years. So this offers points if they're going to, basically give an extra 20 years of affordability if they're in a high opportunity area. These points are not available to properties that are not in a high opportunity area. Next is the on-site resident services coordinator. There are 2 opportunities here, either full-time or part-time. This is for offering a resident service coordinator who is not necessarily a caseworker, but somebody that kind of helps the residents connect to different services in the community. But they are not somebody that is actually going to provide counseling or something like that. They just connect people to services. All right. Any questions on that first section?
Deb, you'll go back and do the threshold after you do the points?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Nandini,
Okay.
just very quickly, just to reiterate, and for those of you in the mortgage committee, I called attention to this in the mortgage committee as well. But I continue to think that giving points for supportive housing and continuing to approve these projects without having an understanding of a full understanding of the stock we have and the demand in all of these categories, which I understand is complicated to get to, but I think we do need to tackle that instead of just continuing to create new units without understanding how much of a hole we're filling and what the whole picture looks like. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, Lisa, we completely agree, and we've already had some offline discussions about it, and we'll look for your input as we move forward with this. This is a category that we've gotten the most comment from the outside community on, and it's time that we addressed it with this iteration.
All right, the second category is financial efficiency and sustainability. The first item is hard cost effectiveness. This is a CHFA determined point. Our architectural and construction services folks will come up with a benchmark and they will evaluate the costs and they will add on for extraordinary conditions such as environmental cleanup or historic rehab, things like that. They'll come up with what an expected cost is. They'll compare it to what the developer is proposing. And if there's a small deviation, then they will get points.
And Pat and Debbie, could you just scroll up for a second? The construction standards. Are we going to be able to talk about those with you? I think it's important that we all are very clear that we have heard from a number of developers who do believe that the standards are onerous and costly. And I have heard repeatedly, whether or not this bears out in reality, I have heard repeatedly that our construction standards are often higher than what regular market rate residential construction would usually meet. So again, I'm not, I don't have the expertise to attest to whether that is true or not, but I think it's really important for us to have a discussion of that and hopefully to avail ourselves of some of the expertise we do have on this committee in that discussion.
Yeah, that is definitely on our agenda for this year. I'm not sure that we can do it coincidental. It's going to be a sizable undertaking. Our design standards are something that have evolved over probably the last 20 years, maybe more. And we want to make sure that we have a very thoughtful approach. I think I mentioned this at the board retreat that yes, our requirements do end up costing more than your standard market, your market rate deals, but some of that is because we require some materials and some construction methods that are going to make the property more sustainable because these affordable properties, restricted properties don't generate the income that a non-restricted property would. And so while a non-restricted property has available cash for capital improvements over time, we're trying to get these properties to last a little bit longer on a tighter budget. So it's absolutely something that needs to be reviewed and it needs to be altered, especially since over time, a lot of the building codes have also been elevated to address some of the problems that our design standards were meant to address. So we may be repetitive. Just recently, we looked at we've been looking at an instance where we're requiring standby battery support on a property of like 48 hours versus the state requirement of 24, and that additional 24 hours is costing the project $1 million. So we have to look at that and say, what are we trying to accomplish? Does it accomplish it? Is it worth it? And so we're going to have to do that with pretty much all of our design standards, but that it's one of our priorities for 2025 in multifamily. I'm not sure we'll be able to get through all of it coincidental with the QAP.
And Lisa, we are doing the same with the department, other departments. which we have been meeting with architects, and they continue. There is a small group because the feedback is the same. The luxury market rate housing is a lot cheaper than what we're building. And also some of the code enforcement. So my staff is also working, a couple of my architects, with DAS on code enforcement and see how that, because they also get the same concerns that the cost is pretty dramatic. So we're trying to address that. But we'll work in collaboration with CHFA on some of the work that my staff is doing.
Well, thank you to both of you. I absolutely appreciate that that's complicated. I just hope that we all share the urgency, because the housing crisis in Connecticut is real. And
Yeah.
if you're spending more per unit and don't need to be doing that, then we could be building more units. So Pat, I don't know how we can be of support to you in being creative to try and expedite that type of review, but you have been very creative, and I know that you've already thought about this clearly, but there is a specific, I think, urgency to trying with this QAP cycle to see how much more can we squeeze out of what we have in terms of construction. I think it's just urgent. Thank you.
Understood.
Okay, the next item is credits per qualified bedroom. This requires us to count up the number of bedrooms in all of the qualified units and divide that into the number of credits. The lowest number of credits per bedroom gets the full 5 points, and then they are tiered from there based on their ranking. This is designed to encourage the production of larger units. Credit equity less than 50% of total uses. This is designed to promote leveraging of other funds. If the sources of funds if the tax credit equity is less than 50% of the total sources of funds, they will get points. However, in a qualified census tract or difficult development area, that goes up to 65% that can be attributed to the tax credit equity. Next is other permanent funding sources. So this is commitments of non-debt sources that are also non-state sources. So things like local housing trust funds, FHLB awards. We do include land contributions based on the appraised value. Things like that will offer 1 point for that. Plans and specifications. Our threshold requirement for the percent complete is 40%. So if they do come in at 90%, they are given 1 point for that. Okay, next is
Jeff, can I ask a
sustainable
quick
design.
question?
Sure. Yep.
So I know at one point when I first started at CHFA, this used to be 3 points for 90% plans and specs, and we were lobbied heavily to try to reduce that, because they said it was a really high bar for entry, right? Because you're not guaranteed the credits. Have we noticed a difference in the in allowing it to go to 1 point? Are we seeing a big difference between costs or the percentage of completion at award versus at closing? Is there like a big difference in cost, or has it affected our ability to get these deals to essentially be ready to go once we, make the award?
Well, most of them do come in with 90% drawings.
So,
I
okay,
think the only time we see them lower is in the preservation classification, which is not scored lately in the last, since that was established.
okay.
Prior to that, I mean, these developers are chasing every single point. So they're doing the 90% if they can. It is easier for our ACS department to evaluate the costs with the 90%. So this is something we should definitely take a look at.
Yeah, it's also, we've had some experience with a couple of projects that weren't this far along. And then when it came to finalizing the deal, they had larger gaps. I mean, we've seen gaps created on the last 5% of completion. So we have to be careful. I think this is a worthwhile incentive.
What we found is, I think it's hard to get sustainability points. if you don't have 90% drawings, because you can't really evaluate the project based on that, so.
Good point.
But it does require, a lot of money up front. That's high risk.
Right.
That's the trade.
And that's a good
Just,
segue to the
just
next one.
curious, just curious on that. Just as I'm listening to this discussion, maybe we could actually look and focus on a way to help with that burden then, or something. Just so that if you're unsuccessful, I don't know. Let me think about it. But I think we're hearing that it's highly desirable from where we sit when we're looking at these, but at the same time we understand that there's a real cost to that if you don't get the work, if you don't get the credits to be able to move forward.
So yeah, I think that we need to take a look at this closely because it requires a lot of money for engineers. I mean, we should come out with at least what we need so that the architects are doing that instead of hiring another architect, because that's what you pay a lot of money, is you hire consultant over consultant to verify and to certify. And that doesn't, yes, it makes you feel better, but it still is just delay and cost. So we should take a look at this and get some professionals to see what's the best way to be able to incorporate some of this.
Yeah, and for people that aren't in development, $1 million to spend to get a project to the point where you can apply for LIHTC, that's,
It's
that's not
significant. Yeah.
unusual.
And it makes the project expensive too, because you have to use your line of credit and the interest is not cheap,
Right.
right? So you're spending
Right,
not
right.
only money on all this design, but also on the
Yeah.
carrying cost, plus taxes and insurance and interest, and it becomes very expensive.
Do
Right.
people excuse me, I'm sorry. Do people get rejected? I mean, like if I'm spending this money, would I know prior, do we ever reject that they don't hit the number? Like, is it?
Yeah, you don't know
It's
because
a competitive, yeah.
there, yeah,
You
because some of the points you get, you can self-score it, but it depends on how other people, score. And then
Wow.
some of the points that are scored internally, it's like the cost effectiveness points. You don't know how you're going to score relative to other projects. So yeah, it's high risk.
So
You
Phil,
can
Is there-
we have,
easily shot $1 million and for maybe a 1 in 3 chance of winning.
so Phil,
so-
we have 16, I think about 16 applicants for this round, right?
Yes.
And we will only fund about six or seven.
But
Yeah.
is there
So
there a
you
way
have like
to-
50-50 chance.
is there a way to pre-approve? I mean, is there a way so that it's just could potentially reduce the cost involved, or no? It's more just ranking based off of points.
I see where Phil's going with this, though. I mean, one of the ways to look at it, could there be like a knockout stage? Like that if you get past this point, now you have to kick it in, so there's less risk. I just don't know what that would look like, but it is serious when, here we are pushing for affordable housing. That's a huge number. That should be a number of units that these guys could build otherwise.
But that's a cost of the project. So if the project moves forward,
Right.
you already have your drawings at 90%. So just so everybody understands, the risk that we have in not getting more complete drawings is the pricing, right? That becomes a problem. And so as you go down the completion scale, right? If you get to 40-50%, the pricing that you get is truly an estimate, because your drawings don't have enough specificity to really price it properly. And so what we have found over time is that if we accept applications that have 50% drawings, there's a good likelihood when it gets priced that the project is going to have a gap. And then we're going to have to and then we chase the gap. And that happened a lot during the pandemic years, where the delays caused, additional gaps, and we just kept chasing the gaps until we were finally able to find them. So again, this is another one of those balance issues, is where do we draw the line to get the most accurate
Yeah.
pricing we can on a deal versus putting a burden on those projects that are not going to move forward. And if they don't move forward this year, again, it doesn't mean that the $1 million or however much money they've spent has been wasted. It may have been spent prematurely, right? So they could always, a lot of these deals will come in round after round until they score high enough, improve their scoring.
Okay.
And in terms of doing sort of
But
a
if-
knockout round,
But with every
I
round that
don't-
they, but I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
start to interrupt, but with every round they come back in, there's additional cost, correct?
Sure.
Could be
Yeah.
additional cost, but not at that level, Phil. So you're not going to
Right.
incur $1 million this time. And if you wait and reapply next year, you'll have a $2 million cost, because what you've paid for in terms of design
No, I
should
get it.
carry over. You'll have to get it repriced. You may tweak a few things. You may do some
Okay.
value engineering. So you'd have those additional costs, but your foundational costs will carry forward.
Got it.
So let me just ask one more question. So when we look at that subset of people that have gone to that level and say brought their drawings up to the 90%, how many of those people do we no longer see if they were unsuccessful? In other words, they do drop out and they eat that amount in effect.
They
Is
usually come
was
back.
that 1 out of
Yeah.
3? They
There's
do,
other
right? They
options,
do
too.
come back?
Yeah, there's other options too, besides the 9%. We've had other deals that presented with 90% drawings that didn't score high in the round. And we've essentially reached out to them to try to have them work it through,
Okay.
most likely a 4% transaction, so that there's other alternatives to being able to utilize what they've already put together in a deal. We're gonna try
Yeah.
to get every deal with affordable housing in it financed one way or another, either through DOH or through CHFA's other programs. So we're pretty aggressive on that front.
So Greg, usually there's some that have this big gap because it's equity that they bring with the 9%, right? But if a project is ready, we have taken some projects that have been ready to go and try to finance it with putting a little more of DOH funds, and then using the 4% with some of the financing from CHFA. So we'll make it work.
So yeah, because the risk to us is just too great not to really get to that level. I mean, you can see that's a fact, but it is just at a tremendous cost.
Yeah,
Potentially.
and I have a couple of, we should take this conversation, especially on the building. And Greg, is you're willing to be part of it, and a couple of architects, because there should be a way to lower the cost on the way that we're doing it, and have that conversation separate from this. So I'll reach out to you, and
That's
we'll
fine.
come up with something to talk about the building plans and specs.
And
Yeah,
just
I'll tell you
last but not least, there is a preliminary application process that we have created in the last couple of years where, to Phil's point, I think Deb and her team have conversations with folks who are ready to proceed for the next 9% round, and we'll have a nice back and forth conversation with them. And I believe there may be some applicants there that decide that they're not, based on the feedback, may go back to the drawing board or take more time to apply. So, I mean, there are those conversations happening. I'm not sure we're issuing a hard no or anything like that, but it's a conversation.
Right. And we're
Like in
also
planning
having
and
a brief-
zoning, it's helpful.
So,
Yeah.
Deb, we have a lot of other priorities, right, that you're
Yeah.
Yeah.
gonna wanna go through. Maybe can you highlight some of that, and then, you send the information to us, to move it along, and then
Sure.
we can read it.
Sure. Okay. So quickly, the next item is sustainable design. These are energy efficiency measures. I don't claim to know anything about this. It's solar, passive house, things like that. If you have specific questions, we can ask ACS to respond.
Yeah, that category is another one that we have gotten feedback from developers that we need to also take a look at it.
Yep.
The next one is cost effectiveness of intermediary costs. Those are third-party vendor costs, such as architects, legal, things like that. We're basing this on the proposed costs in the application and seeing who has proposed the lowest. Is there some manipulation of the truth? Possibly. We haven't really been able to quantify whether they come in exactly the same when they close. Okay, the next section is local impact, priority locations. This is based on the OPM priority locations map. It gives points for these items, whether it's in an urban area, near a mass transit station, has public water and sewer, or has access to a local bus. We see most of those points going to our more urban areas.
Yeah, Deb, so just, I don't want to gloss over that. This is an impactful set of points. It's one of the issues that's out there in terms of not being able to reach some of those smaller outlying communities where it's claimed that they're disadvantaged. This is one of the things that could come into play in that discussion because a lot of those communities don't have this infrastructure in place. Makes it very difficult to build a sizable multifamily project if you don't have sewer, right? I mean, septic requires massive amounts of land if you're going to do septic for large multifamily, or you'll need an on-site treatment plant. Again, very costly and hard to maintain. So this, everybody should pay attention to this because this priority location is something that we should discuss in depth.
Okay, next is transit-oriented development, which is a little bit of a misnomer here. The first one is proximity to transit, which is a mass transit station, such as a railroad station or the fast track busway. But the second part of this is proximity to amenities, which is either you're close to private amenities, such as grocery stores, doctors' offices, things like that, or public amenities like schools or parks. Pretty much everywhere is within 2 miles of something. So these points are very easy to get. The next one is family developments, where they get points if greater than 50% of the units have 2 or more bedrooms. We basically see most of the developments with 51% 2 bedrooms and 49%, 51% 2 bedrooms and 49% 1 bedrooms. They're really not going too far over that for some reason, but they're still getting the point.
And Debbie, just to pause on that for a minute, do we
Sure.
have a good understanding of the gap of housing we're trying to fill? How many 1 bedrooms and how many 2 bedrooms, or did we just kind of arbitrarily set 50% here?
I don't know if Terry knows the history on that one.
Yeah, this is something we can look at, Lisa. I agree with what you're saying. Our market study should indicate whether there's a need in the area for 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. So I think maybe we need to nuance this a little bit more to be in line, maybe be in line with a corresponding market analysis of some kind, or maybe we can through our REMO department we can identify unit size needs.
This is one of those changes that came into play in 2016, looking to increase family units. And so that's why you had to have more than 50% is because they really wanted family units. And you'll see a lot of that peppered throughout the QAP points, credits per bedroom. That's also incentivizing family units. But
Which
that's
I
where
think is
this came
terrific.
from.
Yeah, absolutely. The question in my mind is whether that's the right mix.
Right, exactly.
If we have data to base it on, then we could say it actually should be, making this up, 70% have 2 or more bedrooms. So if
conversely,
data.
No, you're right. Because conversely, we also hear that there's a huge need for senior housing. So what do we know? So you're right. We can look and get some data on that.
Yeah, just some cautions on this. I think Greg might have checked out, but we also have to be mindful that we don't want to put together points that are going to be in conflict with most of our local zoning in terms of what they will allow for unit mix. So I know that's a big deal at the approval stage.
And also, don't forget, I mean, I'm totally for looking at better ways
Mhm.
to structure this stuff, but if we, because people have to self-score their applications, they have to know where they stand with respect to most categories. So if it's based on if it's location based in terms of whether or not their unit mix matches what the location needs are, we're gonna have to make public sort of
Yes.
what that requirement is and then how to more closely match that requirement in order to get the points. Just a technicality, but
Yep.
something we have to figure out.
Okay, the next one is a signed resident participation agreement. This is for public housing that is existing and occupied, and there is a state law that requires the residents to be involved in any discussions of rehabilitation.
Just a quick question on that. If it's a statutory requirement that they do that, why are we giving them a point for adhering
I
to this
was
statute?
wondering that because it's also a threshold requirement. So when we get to the
Do
threshold.
you
we see
also
that.
allow the nonprofits that provide resident service participation get a point?
I don't think we've seen that, but we would consider it, sure.
Kathy, do you have resident participation? Do you have a resident coordinator?
Yeah,
Did you get those? that point?
we have resident services coordinator, but we don't have a resident participation agreement. I mean, we
Oh,
don't,
so you
because,
don't apply
yeah,
for
it's
that
not really,
point?
it's not really, no, we've never applied for that because I think it doesn't, I think we always assumed it didn't apply to us.
This is specific to housing authorities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should consider that if there are other nonprofits that provide to take it as a resident and just give it the opportunity to everybody that has that resident participation or something
Or
like
just
that.
skip
Or
this
take it out.
altogether.
Yeah.
Right.
take it
Right.
out.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
Well, the other
Yeah.
thing is the occupied properties are typically going into the preservation class too.
Right.
Mm.
So they're not being scored, so they're not required to provide this to us.
Right.
Okay, next is 3 points for a historic place, an adaptive reuse or brownfield development. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. Next is a point for being located in a qualified census tract or a difficult development area. Okay, this one, it was new in the last major update to the QAP. It's a little confusing. So 3 points are awarded if the development is part of a concerted community revitalization plan, which has to meet all these criteria that are listed here, or if the town has adopted an affordable housing plan in accordance with Section 830J of the Connecticut General Statutes. So I looked today, and there are only 7 towns out of the 169 that have not adopted an affordable
Right.
housing plan. So this is a fairly easy point to get if they're in one of the other 162 towns.
Right.
So this
Yeah.
is what we should look at.
Yeah, we definitely have to update this. Don't forget that the housing affordability plans were executed over the past couple of years. I'm not sure, Commissioner, when that started, but I know most of them signed their plans into effect within the last year or so. So
Sure.
we should definitely take a look at removing those points or reclassifying those points.
Okay, the next section is opportunity characteristics, where there are 6 points for municipalities with less than 10% affordable housing. And for the opportunity areas, based on the opportunity map that was mentioned earlier, they're tiered from very high to low gets 2 points, very low gets no point.
So these are the points that often get referred to as disadvantaging certain communities. The map that we utilize is provided by Aaron Boggs Group OCA. I'm not sure when it was last updated. I went onto the website today, but I couldn't find when they last published it. But we'll do a little bit of research on the map, find out what their intentions are for updating it. It may be, I don't know if it's dynamic information or if it's updated with census information, but we'll find all that out so that we're we can get very smart on how this impacts our users.
And when we get some information, Pat, we should invite the delegation from New London because they were very vocal. They sent us a
Yes.
letter last time. So I think that once we get to this particular point, we should have them to, and if you invite Erin, who is the author of the map, or if we decide to get rid of the map, whatever we're gonna go through, please make sure that we invite the delegation of the New London.
Yeah, I'd like
All
to
right.
suggest, just while we're talking about maybe the removal of the map, let's not forget that a lot of deals have been built around getting the points for this map. And so I would, as I said earlier on, I would suggest that if ultimately we want to remove the map, we do it in iterations. So maybe we change the points that are allocated based on the map, maybe reallocate those
Yeah,
over
we have to go over the process, right? And then
Yeah.
we'll make a decision
Yeah,
by just
yeah.
saying that let's bring them in too, so they can put their comments ahead of time.
Absolutely.
All right, we've reached the last section, which is qualifications and experience. So we offer points for experience of the sponsor applicant general partner based on the number of LIHTC projects that they have placed in service that have been in operation for more than 5 years. And also based on their number of years of program experience, they can get up to 5 points in this area. We offer points if the developer or sponsor is providing some of their own resources into the deal. We do see this in the form of either land contributions, they've already purchased the land, or maybe they got some sort of discount on the land and there's a difference between the appraised value and what they paid. Sometimes they do put in a general partner loan that will be repaid, over the life of the development.
And we hold them to that commitment.
Yes,
So
we do not let them reduce
they
that.
go below whatever they've committed. So in some cases, the developer will go out and find replacement for that GP note, but we don't allow them to replace all of it. We
Right.
make them keep their commitments.
Whatever they've received points for, they are required to put in. And the last two things are women and minority participation. We are currently giving points for ownership if women or minorities are in the ownership, development, or management of the project. We basically look at that as if it's a nonprofit, if their board is more than 50% minority or female, then they do qualify for the points. Or if they are registered as a MBE with the state, they will get the points. And the last is a 1 point for a Connecticut-based contractor. They do have to have been established in Connecticut for at least 3 years, and they would get the point if they are. Any questions on points?
Can you very quickly take us through the threshold items? So these are the points, and what Deb's going to do now is talk about what's threshold. These are the levels and requirements you have to meet to submit an application for an application to be acceptable.
Right. So there are 22 basic threshold requirements, but I can go through them pretty quickly. The first one is it has to meet one of the 8 things listed here that are goals of the C&D plan that Terry mentioned. There's 8 of them. It's very easy for anyone to find something that they fall into. So that's never a problem. They have to have a proposed credible financing plan. Now, this is a big one. So as mentioned, we get about 10.8 million in credit for 2025. And we do limit the amount of credits per application to either 30,000 credits per qualified unit and 20% of the population component, which is the 10.8 million that I just mentioned. 20% is about 2,170,000. That is the highest award that we can give as long as it does not exceed 30,000 per qualified unit.
So Deb, don't jump off of that just yet, because I want to make sure everybody understands. So when somebody submits a project, they submit an application for a project, we're limiting them to no more than either 30,000, we're limiting them to the lesser of either $30,000 per unit or the 2 million, what was it, 2,100,000?
2,170,000.
2,170,000 in aggregate for the entire project. So if somebody comes in, and we hear about this often, that we should increase the cap on per unit and our overall cap. The problem with doing that is it means that we're now putting more credits. We're getting less efficient with our credits, right? So we're putting more credits into a single project for the same number of units, which means we're not going to have them available to drive the development of other units. So in looking at this the last time around, and also we continue to look at this, we're in terms of what other states offer, we're right. We're not on the low side. We're not on the high side. We're sort of right in the middle. So just so everybody understands, this is a limitation on how many credits they can apply for. What we did do in the last time we did some changes to the QAP was we modified the language we had related to hybrids. And so the hybrid allows for that excess basis that the developers have been trying to access through these increased limits. And it allows them to utilize it within a 4% with an accompanying 4% transaction, so that they're now better able to utilize that additional basis. So we've got, Deb, I think 3 hybrids this year, right?
We have 3. Yes.
We have 3 applications for hybrids, and so it appears that the changes that we made have really addressed the issues that developers had with these credit limitations.
What if the cap was, if you had a project cap but not a unit cap? If you wanted to have more mixed income housing, I mean, I've never tried to do this, but you know, I guess that goes kind of back to an overall goal, right? Is do you want to have more mixed income housing, which some people would say should be a goal. So you could still have a project cap, but maybe not a unit cap.
Yeah, but that would allow small projects,
Right.
to be built. So
Yeah,
we would the efficiency of the use of our credits, it really gets diluted, right? And that's what we're trying to. Actually, I would love to find a way to increase the efficiency of our units, and that might be cost. It could be a bunch of other things. So it's a tough call. This is something we did a lot of research on last time around. It's a difficult situation.
Yeah. Well, the hybrid model, because that's, you hate to leave credits on the table, but the hybrid model really kind of takes care of that.
Right.
Okay, next is a requirement for a phase 1 environmental site assessment and zoning approval, as well as a qualified development team. We do look at the qualifications of the applicant, the architect, the GC, and the management company. This number 6, bidding and project cost adjustments, basically says they have to comply with bidding requirements. I think we rely on DOH's procurement review to make sure this is met. Okay, number 7 is construction oversight. They have to commit to providing observation reports to us. If we have CHFA financing, we do hire our own construction observer that goes out bi-weekly. If they do not have our financing, they have to provide their own architect's reports at least monthly to us so that we can keep tabs on the progress. Number 8 is no resident displacement. The proposal should not displace anybody if there's people already there. Next is the affordability commitment that I mentioned earlier. We do require at least 40 years, which is 10 years beyond what the minimum the code requires. This also talks about the 20% of the units that have to serve households with incomes greater than 30%, but less than or equal to 50% of the area median income. Next is plans and specs. We talked about that. This is the 40% threshold requirement. Next, we have preservation classification, hard cost. We do require that any rehabilitation cost at least $25,000 per unit. That is super easy to meet these days. That's very low, so we have no trouble ever meeting that. Next is resyndication. So if the project has received credits in the past, we want to see at least 20 years has gone by before we will consider another credit award. The next is the very low income construction employment policy. That's a board policy that we do require all our applicants to comply with. Next is a capital needs assessment for anyone in the preservation class. They have to provide that. Number 15 is if there's any prior non-compliance with the LIHTC program, they are not qualified to apply. This is the one I mentioned about the public housing resident participation. So it is a threshold item that if there is existing public housing unit residents, that they do have to have this plan, but then we end up giving them a point for it. Number 17 is the public housing preference. This isn't in the IRS code, that the applicants have to commit to giving preference in their tenant selection plans to households on housing authority waiting lists. Number 18 is waiver of a qualified contract. So this has been in place the entire time I've worked here. So I've never encountered a qualified contract, but my understanding of it is that it has to do with transferring ownership of the property and the possible loss of the affordable units. I think
Yes.
the housing agency has to go out and find a buyer in order to preserve those units, but we require everybody to waive that so that we've not had to encounter that. I know other states have lost a lot of units to this. Number 19 is a market study. We do require that CHFA order a market study for all of our tax credit deals. Number 20 is another element of the code, that's tenant ownership proposals. It is an option that after the compliance period, the development can turn into something like a condo and allow for tenant ownership. If they do plan on doing that, we just want to see their plan and make sure it's credible. I have not seen that in a long time. Number 21 is if they have been awarded in the last 2 rounds, they have to be on track to meet benchmarks for those developments. We typically see that if they are applying in a 3rd year, that they have closed at least one of the previous 2 and be very close to closing the 2nd one. And the last one has to do with energy efficiency and the preservation classification, because those properties tend to be existing. So we're just requiring that they propose a scope of work based on recommendations from an energy consultant for the highest energy efficiency measures that are appropriate to the existing building. And that's all the threshold requirements.
All right, we're quickly running out of time. Does anybody have any questions on the threshold items? Terry, do you want to walk us quickly through the planning for the board task force meetings?
Okay, so we'll be doing our outreach now. Our next meeting will be, I want to say that right after mortgage committee in February. So between now and then, we'll be doing some outreach efforts and bringing back to you what we've received for comments. We'll be doing some research to answer questions that have come up already, such as seeing if we could identify the need and quantify what size units are needed in different communities, however we can identify that. And then we'll bring that forward and start to dig deep into the major categories that are, we're discussing, and see if we can't come up with a strategy to implement change that doesn't negatively impact developments already in the works that will be applying for, say, credits in 2026. I think if we continue with that path, each time you have, questions or guidance or looking for information, we can find it, identify it, answer the questions, bring it back to you, and come together with a decision-making process that would keep us on track, so that we would have a draft for the board's consideration produced by the board task force in April. So it's an aggressive schedule, but it will keep us on track to have a QAP ready for the overview session in September, which, is what the applicants for 2026 in January are going to be looking at.
So, Terry,
Mhm.
You're saying that you guys are gonna do the public input between February and March?
Yes,
We will be meeting in February,
yes,
so you'll just give us an update of what is going on with the inputs. And then,
right,
in March, we will look at all the comments. Is that what we're planning?
correct, yes.
Okay.
Because there may be some
February and
more,
March. We'll look
Yeah.
at comments in February and March.
Whatever we have,
exactly, yeah.
whatever we have, we'll share with the whole group.
Mhm.
All right.
Does CHFA have any analysis of the types of projects that have been funded with the existing QAP versus the prior one? You know, are there, you know, trends that have occurred? I mean, I think you alluded to some of them, but
Yeah, so we take a look at that and we can put some information together. It's hard over the past 5 years to establish trends because of that little pandemic thing that happened, really messed around with the types
Yeah.
of projects we saw
Yeah.
and their delivery, and their pricing most notably.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have seen since I went back and looked at since 2019, costs have just they've almost doubled. It's really stark to see what costs have done. Obviously,
yeah.
it's not just in what we're doing, it's in every industry, but
yeah. Well, I'm curious about like location, right? So
Yeah,
the
we do
trend
that.
in where projects are being built, maybe the types. I mean, we were talking about, you know, is it more, you know, 1 and 2 bedrooms or larger? You know, not anything
Sure. So
too
Pat,
crazy.
you can compile this for the past
Mhm.
4 years because we did 2
Yeah.
years, 2 years, right? This is
Yep,
the new
yep.
one.
Yeah, it would just be
On
interesting.
the 9%, families, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, preservation, new construction, so that we have an idea in the towns. And maybe you can just highlight the towns that are high opportunity so that
Yeah,
we
we could do all that. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's particularly useful now because we have this second year of applications coming in off of the current, right? So,
All right.
we'll have a better
So,
sense of how things work.
I have to approve the minutes before, because I do have to leave right after this meeting. And Terry, I need to approve the minute from June 27.
Yes, please. From the last,
Do you think that I
Task force.
remember?
I just want to say one thing so everybody understands this, that while we get $10 million a year, roughly $10 million a year, we have a 25% set aside for preservation deals. So all the pointing that we just talked about is not applicable on the preservation deals. The preservation deals are done on a priority basis, and I think there's 5 different priority categories.
There's 6.
6 priority categories. We can go into that next time around, but so there's really only around $7.5 million available for the other 11 or so projects that we have this year. So we have a total of $10 million, $10,200,000 available. And I know, Deb, I'm getting it wrong.
Doesn't matter.
But we have requests in this year of around 22 or 23 million, somewhere
Yeah,
around that.
something
So
like that.
we're again like 2.5 times oversubscribed. So I say that because you'll understand the need for the competitive scoring and ranking. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a way to fairly allocate these credits.
All right, thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from June 27, 2023?
Absolutely. I so moved.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So we'll meet in February and go over, and then Pat, you're going to collect some information
Yes.
on the projects that we have done in the past 4 years, and then we can review it.
Terry, I
Sounds
just want to
good.
remind you about the supportive housing request from Lisa as well. I know you mentioned the
Oh,
bedroom
yes,
sizes, but okay.
I have some analysis from September, but I've just asked for an update so we could get something and, you know, maybe something a
Okay.
little bit fresher, and we'll share that.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
May
you
I have
so much,
a
everyone.
motion to adjourn the meeting?
Can I make that motion?
Move,
Sorry, Pat, I need a board member.
I know.
move. It's Tim.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
okay, thank you. Second,
Lisa?
okay. Motion carries, you guys can go home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.